Humans were forbidden from building warships. The galaxy ignored their warning. The hall smelled like recycled air and old decisions. Cauldress Station hung in orbit above a gas giant that no one had named yet, because no one had cared enough to. It was a ring-shaped structure, wide and silver and cold, built by the Vorath 30 years ago as a place where civilizations could sit in the same room without killing each other. Most diplomats called it neutral ground. Nina Aldrich called it a theater. She had been calling it that since she was 20, back when she used to read the summit transcripts in her dorm room in Columbus and feel something hot and tight in her chest that she had no word for then and several words for now. She sat at the long table and kept her hands still. The hall held 47 representatives from 11 species. Some had translators pressed behind their ears. Some communicated in light patterns and had machines that converted those patterns into sound. The Vorath Consul Prime, a creature named Orath, had 8 limbs, each one moving slightly independently, the way fingers drum a table, and he was watching her with something that the room's translation system kept rendering as satisfaction. Nina had looked up that word in the Vorath cultural database the night before. The closest alternate translation was relief. She kept her face even. The Cauldress Accord ran 847 pages. She had read all of it. Not because her job required it. Her job required that she understood the summary, but because she was the kind of person who grew up in a small town where you learned early that the people handing you a contract were always more interested in what you did not read than what you did. The core of it was simple. Humanity was banned from building warships. No combat vessels. No orbital weapons platforms. No combat-grade artificial intelligence systems capable of independent targeting. The treaty language defined a warship as any vessel whose primary design function is the deployment of lethal force against another recognized civilization's military assets. Primary design function. She had underlined that phrase 4 times. The reasoning, Orath explained at the opening session, was peace. The galaxy had seen enough war. The elder species, the Vorath, the Sindari, the Arketh, and 4 others, had all gone through their violent periods. They had come out the other side older and smaller and wiser. Humanity, Orath said, was simply being invited to skip the difficult part. The room applauded this. Several species produced sounds that the translators flagged as approval. Nina watched Lou Garrett in the gallery above. He was 72 years old. He had a face like a road that had seen weather. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and he was not watching Orath. He was watching the table. Specifically the pen that Nina would use to sign. He had the particular stillness of a man who had already made a decision and was now just waiting for the calendar to catch up. Lou had commanded the human defense fleet at the Kepler skirmish 11 years ago. The Vorath had sent a diplomatic vessel through human-claimed space without notification, and 2 of Earth's patrol ships had intercepted it, and for about 9 minutes the whole situation had existed at the edge of something catastrophic. Lou had been the one to de-escalate. He had done it with such calm and such precision that the Vorath military attaché had later told a journalist that speaking with Admiral Garrett was like trying to argue with a mountain. After the Kepler skirmish, the Vorath began drafting the accord. It was not a coincidence. Nina signed the document at 11:43 in the morning, Cauldress Standard Time. Her hand did not shake. She used a pen her grandfather had given her, a plain thing, nothing fancy, the kind you buy at a drugstore, and she pressed it firmly to the line and wrote her name the way she had always written it, with no flourish. She capped the pen. She set it down. She thought, briefly, about her grandfather's fishing cabin. The lake in the early morning. The way the water held the sky. The room made its approval sounds again. Orath descended from the console platform to speak with her. He was tall in the way that things built differently are tall, not looming, just other. He said, through his translator, that Earth should feel reassured. That this was a beginning. That the galaxy welcomed humanity as a full partner in the community of civilizations, unfettered by the history of conflict. Of course, Nina said. She shook his hand. His limb. Whatever the diplomatic protocol required. She had checked twice. On his way out, Lou Garrett walked through the lower corridor. A young Vorath attaché stopped him, minor staff, bright-eyed, the kind of young diplomat who still believed that the words in documents matched the intentions behind them. Your people should feel reassured, the attaché said. He had clearly been briefed to say this to any humans he encountered. The Accord protects everyone. Lou looked at him for a moment. Not long. Just enough. We do feel reassured, Lou said. That's the part that should worry you. He walked on. The attaché stood for a moment, running the sentence back through his own internal translator, trying to find the version of it that was polite. There was not one. That night, in a Cauldress station corridor that the security cameras covered only partially, Nina found Lou near a viewport that looked out at the gas giant below. She stood beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. The planet turned slowly in its own weather. They think they've solved us, she said. They think they've delayed us, Lou said. Different problem. You already have something started. It was not a question. She had been in enough rooms with enough careful people to know when someone was already in motion. Lou looked at the planet. The Accord bans ships whose primary design function is combat, he said. That's a very specific phrase. I know. I underlined it. Good. He straightened up. Then you already know what we're building. She did. She had known since she read page 412, where the definition sat in its clean legal language, and she had turned the page and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace. Something more useful than peace. A direction. The Accord went into effect at midnight. In a facility in Nevada, 23 floors beneath a stretch of high desert where nothing officially happened, the first hull plate of something enormous was bolted into place. The workers wore plain clothes. The foreman, a retired engineer from a shipyard in Bremerton, checked the alignment 3 times before signing off. He called it a good start. He did not say what it was a start of. No one in that room needed it explained. Outside, the desert was dark and very quiet, and the stars were the kind of close and clear that only happens far from cities, and if you stood in the right spot and looked up you could see the gas giant that Cauldress Station orbited, just barely, a small bright point that didn't twinkle the way the others did. It just sat there. Steady and cold. Like something waiting to be dealt with, the compliance reports were filed on the 1st of every month. They were thorough. They were accurate. The Hegemony's Bureau received them, stamped them, and filed them in a database that 3 different species had access to, and none of them read with any particular attention, because the reports were boring in the specific way that compliance reports are always boring, full of numbers and vessel classifications and fuel capacity ratings and manifest codes that translated, in every language, to nothing interesting happening here. That was, of course, the entire point. Dr. Carla Prentice had designed the filing system herself. She was 41 years old, and she had a particular gift for understanding what people were not looking at. She had grown up in a small town in Alabama where the library had 11 science books and she had read all of them by the time she was 9, and then she had written letters to the county requesting more, and when the county did not respond she had written to the state, and when the state did not respond she had, at age 11, written directly to NASA. NASA had written back. Not with books, with a phone number. A recruiter who had never received a letter from an 11-year-old before and had the good sense to know that was not a thing to ignore. She had dropped out of the University of Chicago after 2 years because the program was moving too slowly. She finished her doctorate at 26. She called the university to let them know. They asked if she wanted to come back and teach. She said she had other things going on. She was not being rude. She genuinely had other things going on. By 2189, 2 years after the Accord was signed, she was running the propulsion lab at the Ganymede shipyards, which officially produced deep space research vessels and colony transports. The manifest for the first completed vessel listed it as a long-range geological survey platform, capacity 40 crew, equipped with remote drilling systems and an emergency medical bay. The emergency medical bay was real. The remote drilling systems were real. The 4 rail-mounted kinetic accelerators folded into the hull between the 3rd and 4th cargo rings were not listed anywhere, because they were part of the structural reinforcement framework, which was technically accurate in the same way that saying a sword is technically a metal stick is technically accurate. Carla ran her hand along one of the panels during the final inspection. She pressed her lips together. She called the ship a good girl. She moved on. The Hegemony inspector came 3 times over 14 years. His name was Lou Sarin. He had 4 eyes, each one tuned to a different wavelength of light. He was thorough. He checked every vessel against its manifest. He checked propulsion outputs, cargo configurations, hull composition, power routing. He could not see what he was not told to look for. The rail systems were powered off during inspections. The targeting computers were reclassified in the ship's operating system as navigational redundancy modules. The ammunition, a phrase that existed nowhere in any manifest, was stored in compartments labeled mineral sample containment. It was not mineral samples. Lucerne filed reports stating Earth was in full compliance with all treaty provisions. He was not lying. He just did not know what questions to ask. Commander Dex Holloway had been flying for the fleet since 2190. He was 29 when he started, and he was 29 in the way that some people are, a little too comfortable in cramped spaces, constitutionally allergic to silence, the kind of person who narrates his own life in his head in the second person. He had grown up in Portland. He had wanted to fly since he was 7. He had gotten very good at it. He was now flying something that the official designation called a multi-role personnel transport with extended emergency response capability. He did not know everything that his ship could do. Nobody told him until they had to. That happened in February of 2193. He was running a standard training loop near Ganymede, the kind of exercise the manifest listed as emergency evacuation simulation, corridor approach, lunar gravity variant, when the targeting system flagged a decommissioned satellite in his flight path. The satellite was old. It had stopped transmitting in 2181. Nobody had removed it because nobody had gotten around to it. His ship's navigational redundancy module, which was not a navigational redundancy module, lit up his console with a clean firing solution. He looked at it for a moment. He pressed the button. Not because he was supposed to. Because it was there, and he was the kind of person who pressed buttons that were there. The satellite came apart cleanly. One piece. Gone. The comm was quiet for a long time. Then Carla's voice came through from the Ganymede monitoring station. She had a habit of biting pens while she worked. She had gone through 2 already that morning. Log it, she said, as a calibration anomaly. That was a gun, Dex said. That was a calibration anomaly, Carla said. Bless your heart. He logged it as a calibration anomaly. He did not ask again. But he flew differently after that. He paid attention to the parts of his ship that the manual did not explain fully. He found 4 more systems he had not been briefed on. He did not report them. He practiced with them. By 2201, he was the best pilot in a fleet that officially did not contain combat pilots. Lou Garrett ran nothing. He held no rank. He had no title. He was listed in several organizational charts as a civilian contractor providing strategic infrastructure consultation, which was the kind of phrase that meant everything and required no further explanation. He was 72 years old, and he spent most of his time in a ranch in Montana, which is where he also spent very little time, because he was usually in one of several secure facilities reviewing one of several things that were not officially being reviewed. He had spent the first 3 years after the signing doing one thing: reading the Accord. All 847 pages. In 6 languages. He had cross-referenced the legal definitions across all 11 signatory civilizations' versions of the text, because treaties get translated and translations shift, and what means one thing in Vorith legal code means something slightly different in the Sindari judicial tradition, and those slight differences are the cracks that a patient person can put 14 years into widening. The word warship was the one he kept coming back to. Defined as any vessel whose primary design function is the deployment of lethal force. Primary design function. He had built an entire fleet inside that phrase. Every ship's primary function was something else. Mining. Medicine. Research. Colony transport. Emergency response. All of those functions were real. The ships genuinely did those things. They were not fake. They were good ships for their stated purposes. They were also, in the margins, something the treaty had no name for, because the treaty writers had never imagined a civilization patient enough to spend 14 years building the most capable combat fleet in the known galaxy while filing accurate paperwork. By 2201, the fleet numbered 412 ships. In October of that year, Lou received a message on an encrypted channel that used a frequency the Hegemony's Monitoring Bureau did not know to check for. The message was 11 words. He read it twice. He stood in front of his fireplace for a moment. Then he went to put on his boots. The message said, "The Crear have crossed the Idris line." He burned it. Outside the ranch, the Montana sky was wide and dark and full of stars, and somewhere among those stars something very old had just woken up and started moving, and it did not know yet what was already waiting for it. It would find out the Idris corridor had no good reputation. It appeared on hegemony star maps as a long stretch of dim space between two spiral arms, not rich in resources, not useful for transit routes, not particularly interesting to any of the 11 civilizations that had signed the Cauldress Accord. Cartographers had stopped updating their maps of it sometime in the early 2100s because there was nothing there that needed updating. Old surveys. Old silence. The kind of space that civilizations use as a natural border between themselves and the things they would rather not think about. The monitoring stations along the Idris line had been placed there 3 centuries ago, when the Crear first went quiet. By 2201, 6 of the 9 stations had gone dark. This had been flagged at 3 separate hegemony summits. It had been placed on the agenda for the next summit at each of those 3 meetings. The next summit was scheduled for 2204. The Crear did not wait. They were not a species in the way the hegemony's member civilizations were species. There was no central government. No single brain issuing orders. The Crear were a swarm, billions of individual units, each one roughly as smart as a simple machine, but collectively capable of thought so deep and so fast that it had no comparison in any language spoken by any creature with a single skull. They had solved problems of astrophysics before humanity had learned to write. They had mapped the local group of galaxies before the Sindari had discovered fire. They had gone dormant 300 years ago, not because they were tired, but because they had finished calculating something and were waiting for the conditions to resume. The conditions had resumed. They did not hate the civilizations in their path. Hate required the kind of attention that implied the other party mattered. The Crear did not calculate in terms of enemies. They calculated in terms of resources. The hegemony's 11 civilizations, their planets, their stations, their food, their infrastructure, their very bodies, the swarm had processed all of this as input and produced an output, and the output was a direction of travel. They emerged from the Idris mouth in a formation that the hegemony's long-range sensors initially read as a navigation error. The mass signature was too large. The equipment must be malfunctioning. The equipment was not malfunctioning. Fleet Admiral Prosvel of the Sindari Home Defense Command stood at his monitoring station on the Sindari orbital shell and watched the sensor data for 40 minutes before he accepted what it was showing him. He was 60 years old. He had 12 years until retirement. He had planned to spend those 12 years updating the Sindari fleet's targeting software and attending the kind of meetings that produced long documents nobody read. He looked at the data. He looked at his communications officer. He said, "Get me the Earth channel." His communications officer did not ask why. She had seen the data too. Nina Aldridge was at her kitchen table. It was 3 in the morning in the time zone where she lived. She had kept her home in Ohio even after becoming ambassador, because there are some things a person needs to hold on to that have nothing to do with the job. The kitchen was dark except for the light above the stove that she always left on, the one her mother had always left on, the habit passed down without discussion. She was awake because she had never been a person who slept well when things were unsettled, and things had felt unsettled for the past 6 days in a way she could not name. She could name it now. Prosvel's image appeared on her communicator. His face, flat and wide and faintly luminescent in the Sindari way, did not look the way diplomats' faces looked. It looked the way faces look when the building is on fire and the speaker is trying to decide how to begin. She said, "How long ago?" Not a question. She had already understood the shape of the call. Prosvel said the Crear had crossed the Idris line 6 days ago. He said the forward fleet was larger than anything in the hegemony's combined defensive inventory. He said the council was assembling but that assembly would take time and time was the one thing the situation did not have. He said, "We request Earth's assistance." Nina set down her coffee. She looked at the wall for a moment. Just a moment. "You banned us from building warships," she said. 14 years ago. "Yes," Prosvel said. "You wrote the treaty. You designed the language. You sent the inspector." "Yes." The silence between them had weight. The kind that comes from a person who has been waiting a long time to say nothing at exactly the right moment. Prosvel spoke again. His translator flagged a register shift in his voice, something it struggled to classify. The closest approximation it offered was supplication, and the cultural index noted that in the Sindari language, this word appeared primarily in ancient religious texts. It was not a word used in living conversation. He said, "Ambassador Aldridge. We were wrong about what you would do with the years we gave you." Nina was quiet. She looked out the kitchen window at the Ohio dark. The yard. The old maple tree her father had planted. Still there. "No," she said. "You were wrong about what we already had." She ended the call. She stood up. She washed her coffee cup and set it on the rack to dry, because she was the kind of person who did not leave dishes in the sink, not even now, not even with the galaxy on the line. Then she picked up her communicator again and made one call. Lou Garrett answered on the first ring. "Light them up," she said. The line went dead. In the 40 seconds that followed, across 412 vessels listed in the Hegemony Compliance Registry as everything except what they were, 412 ships whose manifests described research platforms and hospital ships and mining haulers and colony transports, every secondary system that had never officially existed came online at once. The power signatures lit up across a wide band. Even at distance, the Crear forward scouts detected the energy shift. They were a swarm intelligence. They processed new data constantly, automatically, the way a river processes water, without effort, without pause. They had been calculating this corridor for months. They had accounted for the hegemony's defensive positions, the response times of the elder species fleets, the travel windows and the refueling constraints and the gravitational assists available along their projected path. They had not accounted for this. They paused. A swarm intelligence pausing is not like a person stopping. It is more like a wave pulling back before it decides whether to break. The pause lasted 4.3 seconds, which, for something that calculated at that speed, was a very long time. They recalculated. The recalculation produced a new variable, which produced a new output, which produced something that had no word in the Crear's internal language because it had not been a necessary concept for 300 years. Uncertainty. Back in Ohio, Nina was already moving to the window. The maple tree stood in the dark yard, still and familiar. She had climbed it as a kid. Fallen out of it twice. The second time had been worse, but she had gotten back up and tried again because that was the kind of person she had always been, the kind her mother had called stubborn and her father had called steady, and she had eventually decided was just the only way she knew how to be. She looked up at the stars. They were the same stars. Everything was about to be different. She went to pack a bag. She had a transport to catch by 5 in the morning, and she did not intend to be late, because whatever was coming next was going to need someone at the table who had read all 847 pages and underlined the right phrase and waited 14 years for it to matter. She was that person. She had always been that person. The galaxy had just not been paying attention. The first time Dex Holloway saw the full fleet assembled, he sat in his cockpit for a long moment and did not say anything. 412 ships. Holding in formation near the Idris mouth. Each one running its secondary systems openly for the first time, no inspectors to hide from, no manifests to protect, nothing to pretend about anymore. The energy signatures filled his instruments with data he had never seen displayed all at once. Mining haulers with the electromagnetic profiles of warships. Hospital ships with targeting arrays that could thread around through a keyhole at range. Colony transports that moved, in formation, with the coordinated precision of something that had been trained for this exact moment for 14 years. Because they had been. He exhaled. Then he checked his own systems, the ones the manual had never fully explained, and he got to work. The Crear came through the corridor in a formation that looked like weather. Not like a fleet. Like a pressure system. A mass of units moving with collective intention, each individual piece small, the whole thing enormous and dense and carrying the kind of momentum that does not require a declaration of war because it does not think in those terms at all. For the first 11 minutes, they did not recognize what they were facing. This was not arrogance. The Crear did not experience arrogance. They processed inputs and produced outputs. The input was a fleet of vessels matching known hegemony registry classifications for civilian and support craft. The output was low threat assessment. They continued on their calculated path. 11 minutes is an eternity when you are fighting something that built its guns inside a hospital. Captain Ren Castillo had grown up in El Paso. She was 37 years old. She talked to her ship the way you talk to a younger sibling, with a certain casual authority and a private warmth she would deny having if anyone asked. The ship was officially called Ganymede, 6 on the registry. She called it something different, something she had painted in small letters on the inside of the cockpit panel where only she would see it. She did not think of herself as a soldier. She thought of herself as someone who showed up. The Crear forward units hit the human formation at the 11-minute mark, when their recalculation finally reclassified the fleet as a threat. By then the fleet had already closed distance and established firing angles that the Crear's original path projection had not accounted for. The first exchange was brief and very loud. 3 human ships went dark in the opening minutes. 2 from direct impact, 1 from a cascade failure in the power system that Carla Prentice had flagged in a design review 8 years ago and that had been deprioritized because the ship was officially a geological survey platform and nobody had wanted to overinvest in combat redundancy for a geological survey platform. She had written 3 memos about it. She was at her monitoring station on Ganymede now, watching the battle data come in, and she had bitten through 2 pens and was starting on a 3rd, and she was doing the kind of crying that is not really crying, the kind where your eyes do something and your face does not change and you keep working because the work is the only thing you can actually do. The second movement of the engagement was harder. The Crear adapted. This was what they did. They processed the new data, the fleet's actual capabilities, its formation logic, its weapon signatures, and they updated their model and changed how they were moving. They pulled units back from the front and pushed them around the flanks. They started targeting the human ship's power system specifically, which meant they had already reverse-engineered the main vulnerability in under 20 minutes. 7 more ships went dark. Then 9. Dex was flying the kind of engagement he had trained for without knowing he was training for it. Every drill that had been called an emergency response simulation had been building toward this exact situation, the tight corridor approach, the multi-unit coordination, the way you use the other ships around you as references for your own positioning. He had done it hundreds of times in what everyone had called practice. It was not practice anymore. He watched Ganymede 11 fold in on itself, a slow, terrible compression, like a hand closing, and he did not say anything for a long time. He kept flying. You kept flying. That was the thing nobody told you about this kind of work, that the keeping going was not brave, it was just the only available option, and you did it the same way you breathed, because stopping was not a choice you had access to. Ren took damage on her port side at the 50-minute mark. A kinetic round that did not penetrate the hull but collapsed the port maneuvering system entirely. She lost 40% of her lateral movement. She kept going. She had always been better at going straight anyway. Lou Garrett was aboard the vessel listed in the registry as Deep Space Medical Support Unit Alcyone. He was 72 years old and he had no rank and no official role, and he was running the engagement from a converted medical bay with a communications array that the manifest listed as patient data relay equipment. He watched the battle data for 90 minutes. He watched the fleet hold. He watched it take losses and keep holding, which was the thing he had believed they could do and had spent 14 years making sure they could do, and watching it actually happen was not satisfying in the way he had expected. It was something quieter than satisfaction. Something that felt like a very old debt being paid. At 93 minutes, he made a call. He broadcast on the fleet-wide channel, first time he had spoken aloud during the engagement, and gave a single instruction. 7 words. The fleet adjusted its formation in a way that, from the outside, would have looked like a retreat. 17 ships pulling back. Opening a gap. The Crear, processing this as an opportunity, pushed units into the gap. The gap was not a gap. Carla Prentice had mapped the gravitational interplay between 3 nearby moons and a debris field in this region 17 years ago. She had put it in her research notes under a heading that read, "Interesting navigational problem." The note had sat there for 17 years because it was not relevant to geological survey platforms. It was very relevant to what was happening now. The Crear units that moved into the gap encountered a gravitational situation that their path projections had not modeled because the debris field was not on any standard chart. The swarm could not individuate fast enough, each unit needed to recalculate independently, and the calculations took longer than the time they had. The formation compressed. Compressed formations could not distribute incoming fire effectively. The fleet hit them from 3 angles. The engagement ended 20 minutes later. Not ended as in destroyed. The Crear did not operate on the logic of destruction. They retreated. Pulled back through the Idris mouth. The swarm withdrew to recalculate. In 300 years, they had not retreated once. Prosvel made contact 40 minutes after the last Crear unit crossed back through the corridor. His face on the screen was the face of someone who had watched something he would be trying to explain for the rest of his career. He had clearly been rehearsing an opening line. He gave up on it. "I did not understand," he said, in English, which he had apparently been learning in private, "what you were." Dex Holloway answered before anyone else could. He was still in his cockpit. Still in his flight suit. He smelled like recycled air and sweat and the particular chemical smell of a system that had been working hard for a long time. "We told you," he said. "You just heard forbidden and stopped listening." The line was quiet. Prosvel had no response for that. There was not one. On Ganymede, Carla Prentice set down what was left of her third pen. She pulled up the damage reports. The loss reports. The names attached to the ships that had gone dark. She went through them methodically, the way she went through everything, because the numbers were the thing she could actually do something about, and doing something was the only way she knew how to hold it. She worked through the night. The stars outside the station window did not change. Everything else had. Cauldress Station smelled the same. Recycled air. Old decisions. The specific cold of a place that was built to be neutral and had ended up being nobody's home. Nina Aldridge walked the same corridor she had walked 14 years ago and felt the weight of it differently now. Then, she had been carrying something tight and hot in her chest and Northwest good place to put it. Now she was just tired. The particular kind of tired that comes after something enormous has happened and the paperwork hasn't even started yet. She did not bring a formal delegation. She brought herself. A plain bag. A data pad. A pen, the same drugstore pen her grandfather had given her, the one she had used to sign the accord. She was not sentimental about much. She was sentimental about that. Lou Garrett arrived separately. Nobody had invited him to the summit. Nobody had stopped him at the door, either. He sat behind Nina and to her left, in the gallery seat, the same one he had used 14 years ago. His hands were folded in his lap. He looked like he was waiting for something he had already seen. The hall held 44 representatives this time. 3 were absent. The Arketh delegation had a transit delay, which everyone was being polite about and nobody believed. Along one wall, a holographic relay shimmered with a pale light. The Crear were attending. First time in 300 years. The emissary was not a single form. The relay showed a kind of moving density, the swarm, communicating through a single signal, a voice that the translator rendered as completely flat. Not cold. Not mechanical. Just flat. Like a fact. Consul Prime Orith opened the summit. He was older. His 8 limbs moved less independently now, which was either age or restraint. He spoke carefully. He acknowledged the engagement at the Idris mouth. He used the word effective to describe the human fleet's response, which was the kind of word that does a lot of lifting without admitting anything specifically. Then he got to the point. The Cauldress Accord, he said, remained the foundation of hegemony law. Humanity's fleet, while demonstrably capable, had been constructed in a manner that, while technically compliant with the treaty's letter, had violated its spirit. The Council was prepared to acknowledge the fleet's contribution to the current crisis while also requesting that steps be taken to bring the situation into proper alignment. He used the word expect once. He did not use it again. He may have seen something in Nina's face. She let him finish. She did not write anything down. She sat with her hands open on the table, relaxed in the way that very prepared people are relaxed, not because there is nothing at stake but because they have already done the work and the work is done and now it is just a matter of saying it. She waited until the hall was quiet. Then she spoke. She did not raise her voice. She never did. She had grown up in a house where the people who raised their voices were the ones who had run out of things to say, and she had never run out of things to say. "We complied," she said. You read compliance as disarmament. That is a reading error, not a treaty violation. She let that sit for a moment. You built a cage and told us it was peace. We built a lock on the inside of the door and we waited. She looked at Orith directly. The Crear came. You called us. We came. The hall was very still. We are happy, she said, to discuss the future of our fleet. On one condition. She set the data pad on the table. It made a small sound. You read the warning first. There was a document on the data pad. 1 page. Filed with the Hegemony Compliance Bureau in 2187, on the day the accord was signed, as supplementary documentation. It had been received. It had been catalogued. It had been filed in a section of the database that received roughly the same level of attention as the terms and conditions of a software update. Nobody had read it. Orith reached for the pad. He read. His limbs stilled, one by one, until all 8 were motionless, which was, for a Vorith, the body language of something between shock and deep processing. The other representatives read over translated copies, which had been distributed by Nina's assistant at the exact moment she set the data pad down, because Nina was not a person who left things to chance. The document was dated October 12, 2187. Signed by Lou Garrett, private citizen. Filed under his civilian contractor registration number. It said, if the Crear emerge from the Idris corridor before Earth is permitted to arm, the galaxy will discover whether a treaty clause is worth more than the civilizations it was meant to govern. It said, we are not a threat to this galaxy. We are its contingency plan. Treat us accordingly. The hall read it in silence. The Crear emissary spoke. The flat voice filled the room. The small ones were right, it said. No editorial weight. No satisfaction. No drama. Just the voice of something very old and very large that had recalculated and arrived at a new output. The small ones warned and the warning was not processed. This is a data failure of the systems present in this room. A pause. The kind that feels like weather. The small ones held the corridor. The calculation is updated. It said nothing further. Orith was still looking at the data pad. He looked up at Lou Garrett. Lou had not moved. He had not spoken. He was 72 years old and he had been waiting 14 years to be in this room not saying anything, and he was very good at it. Orith said, quietly, not through the formal translation system, just in Vorith, which the room's ambient translator caught, something that rendered in English as, you knew. Lou looked at him. We told you, he said. Nina slid a second document across the table. She did it the way you hand someone a bill, not aggressively, not dramatically. Just placed it in front of Orith and let it be what it was. It was a new treaty. Drafted by Earth's legal team over the preceding 14 years, pulled off a shelf where it had been waiting since 2189, 2 years after the signing, when Carla Prentice had finished the first hull plate and Lou had finished reading the accord in 6 languages and Nina had finished understanding what she had agreed to and what she had not. The treaty did not ask for the right to build warships. It asked for formal recognition of humanity's existing fleet as a lawful defense asset under the hegemony's collective security framework. It was phrased as a request. It was, in every way that mattered, a fact. Orith read it. He read it the way he had not read the warning, with full attention, each line, each word. His limbs moved slowly. He looked at Nina. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who has already been where this conversation is going and is simply waiting for him to arrive. He signed it. Not because he wanted to. He signed it because the alternative was needing humanity again, asking again, being in this room again and having nothing left to offer except a request, and the Vorith cultural database had a word for that condition, a word used only in historical texts about civilizations that had made one bad decision too many and then needed a favor from the very civilization they had underestimated. He did not want that word to apply to him. The summit ended 3 hours later. On their way out, Nina and Lou walked the same corridor again. Same cold air. Same recycled silence. They did not speak for a while. Some things do not need words when the people involved have been carrying the same thought for 14 years. Lou passed the Crear holographic emitter on his way to the exit. The relay was powering down. The pale, moving density of it was fading. He paused. The signal pulsed once. A single pulse. The closest the swarm had to a gesture. Lou Garrett, private citizen, retired admiral, 72 years old, nodded at it. The way you nod at something that has looked at you clearly and found you worth acknowledging. He went to get his coat. Behind him, the hall emptied out. The representatives filed toward their transports. The Cauldress station recyclers hummed. The gas giant turned below in its long, slow weather. Outside, in parking orbit, 412 ships waited. They were listed in the updated registry now, new classifications, new designations, new legal standing. Their manifests had not changed. Their hulls had not changed. The weapons that had never been listed were still exactly where they had always been. Nothing about them was different. The galaxy had finally learned to read them correctly. That was all. That had always been enough.